Captain Jace Carter sat in the quiet cockpit of his starship, the Vanguard. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound breaking the silence of space. He had been alone for weeks, traveling through uncharted space, far away from any known colony or fleet. He had seen a lot in his career as a space explorer, but nothing like this. A soft beep echoed through the cockpit, and Jace's eyes quickly moved to the radar screen. His brow furrowed. Something was there, something huge. It wasn't a ship, not like any ship he had ever seen. It was alive. His heart started to race as the size of the object began to show up on his sensors. What's going on?" Jace asked, his voice steady despite the sudden fear creeping into his chest. "Unknown object detected, Captain. Mass unknown. Biological readings are off the scale," the AI responded in its usual calm tone. The mass was moving toward him, slow but certain. Jace leaned forward, his hands gripping the controls tightly. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. A massive, living creature was coming toward his ship, and he had no idea what it was or what it wanted. Jace had faced dangerous creatures before, but this was different. This was something he couldn't predict or prepare for. He quickly ran a series of scans, but the results made no sense. The creature wasn't made of any known material. Its biology was foreign to anything the scanners had ever seen. It was like trying to scan something that wasn't even from this galaxy. Then, as if sensing Jace's confusion, the creature made its move. Slowly, it turned toward him, its massive head swiveling with surprising grace for something so large. Two glowing, yellow eyes locked onto Jace's ship. The feeling that washed over him was like nothing he had ever experienced. He was staring into the eyes of something ancient, something that had likely seen far more of the universe than any human could imagine. The creature was easily the size of a small moon, its body covered in scales that shimmered like the surface of a dark, alien ocean. Long, twisted tentacles stretched out from its body, curling and reaching through space. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure as the creature came closer, its body darkening the stars around it. Jace's pulse quickened. The ship's AI chimed in again. "Captain, the object is closing in at high speed. Shall I prepare the weapons system?" Jace hesitated. Weapons? He wasn't sure if that was the right choice. He had no idea if this creature was hostile or peaceful. All he knew was that it was unlike anything he had ever seen, and there was no way he could defeat it with force alone. The creature hovered just outside the Vanguard, its massive form filling Jace's view from the cockpit windows. Jace could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it were studying him, probing him for weaknesses. He had faced many challenges in his career, but this was unlike anything he had ever expected. The silence was deafening. There was no movement, no communication, just the tension of two beings in the cold vastness of space. Jace's hand hovered over the weapon controls. He could fire on the creature, try to scare it off, or perhaps even kill it, but he wasn't sure that would be the right move. What if this was a peaceful encounter? What if this creature simply didn't understand human presence, or worse? What if it was trying to communicate? Jace had read about first contact situations, but nothing had prepared him for this. He was a human alone in the vastness of space, facing something far beyond human understanding. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he sat there, staring into the creature's glowing eyes. Time seemed to stretch on forever. He had to make a decision, and it had to be quick. The creature wasn't going to wait around forever. Suddenly, the idea hit him like a bolt of lightning. A crazy, ridiculous idea. But what if? What if it wasn't about fighting? What if it was about offering peace? Jace's eyes scanned the cockpit, landing on a small compartment that held one of his few personal items, a rare bottle of space beer, something he had brought from Earth as a small reminder of home. It wasn't much, but it was something that humans often used to break the ice in difficult situations. It was a symbol of good faith, of peace. Was it crazy? Probably. Would it work? He didn't know. But he wasn't about to let this massive creature tear his ship apart before he tried something, anything, to avoid a fight. "Aye, prepare the bottle of space beer," Jace ordered, his voice calm, but with a hint of uncertainty. "Captain," the AI questioned, "are you sure this is the correct course of action? The creature could be dangerous." "I don't care," Jace replied, his hand tightening around the controls. "Just do it." There was no time to second-guess himself. The alien Leviathan was closing in, and Jace was about to offer it something that no one had ever offered before, a peace offering from humanity, in the form of a simple bottle of beer. This sets up the suspense of the encounter and hints at the bold, unconventional choice Jace will make in the following parts. It keeps the mystery of the alien Leviathan intact while building tension for the next stage of the story. Would you like me to continue with part 2? Let me know how you'd like to proceed. Jace's heart raced as he stared at the alien Leviathan, his mind torn between fear and hope. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the compartment that held the bottle of space beer. The Vanguard creaked softly around him, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. It was a crazy idea, but Jace felt that he had no other choice. If this creature wanted to end his life, he would face it with everything he had, but he wasn't going down without trying to communicate. The space beer was a rare delicacy, a small treasure from Earth, and it wasn't just for drinking. It was something humans used to bond, to relax, and even to forge connections in the most unlikely situations. Jace had no idea if the creature even understood the concept of drinking, but he figured it was worth a shot. After all, he had nothing to lose. With a deep breath, Jace placed the bottle on the control panel in front of him, the metallic surface gleaming under the cockpit's dim lights. The creature outside continued to float there, silent, its glowing yellow eyes never leaving the ship. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. The seconds ticked by like hours. Jace glanced nervously at the scanner. The creature had stopped moving, its massive body suspended in the void of space just a few hundred meters from the Vanguard. It seemed to be observing him, analyzing his every move. The ship's eye was silent, as if even it was unsure of what to do. For a moment, Jace wondered if the creature even recognized the gesture. Did it understand what the beer represented? Was it even capable of comprehending human customs? He wasn't sure, but he didn't have any better ideas. His only option now was to wait. Then, to his surprise, something incredible happened. The massive alien Leviathan slowly began to move. Its long, twisting tentacles unfurled and extended toward the Vanguard. Jace held his breath, expecting an attack, but instead, the creature's tentacle hovered just inches from the ship's hull. It wasn't threatening. It was cautious, almost curious. Jace's fingers hovered near the communication console. He hadn't activated the translation system yet. The creature's presence was overwhelming, and there was something both terrifying and awe-inspiring about it. The glowing eyes of the Leviathan seemed to pierce through the cold metal of the ship, reaching deep into his soul. "Aye," Jace whispered. "Can we communicate with it? Can we understand what it wants?" The ship's AI responded calmly. "Scanning shows no immediate hostile intent, Captain. The creature's behavior appears to be exploratory. We have no data on similar encounters, but it is not attacking." Jace exhaled slowly, his nerves still on edge. If this creature was peaceful, he couldn't waste the opportunity to try and make contact. Maybe, just maybe, the space beer would be the key to breaking the silence between their worlds. He reached out and pressed a button on the panel, activating the ship's translation system. It was a risky move. He wasn't sure if the system would work on something so alien, but there was no turning back now. "Hello," Jace said, his voice steady but filled with tension. "I come in peace. I offer this to you as a gesture of friendship." The translation system worked quickly, but the words that came through the speaker were not what Jace expected. Instead of a direct translation, the voice was strange, almost ethereal, like a distant echo in his mind. "Offer, peace, earth, life." The words were broken, disjointed, but they carried weight. They felt ancient, like the creature was speaking from a place beyond the physical world. Jace's eyes widened. It was a response. He had made contact. The alien Leviathan was trying to communicate, albeit in a way that was beyond his understanding. It was like listening to a dream, a voice that seemed to stretch across the universe. He didn't hesitate. He activated the airlock, allowing the space beer bottle to float gently out into the vacuum. The tentacle of the Leviathan followed the bottle's movement with intense focus. For a moment, Jace wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But then, the creature's tentacle gently grasped the bottle. The tentacle curled around it, bringing the bottle close to the creature's glowing eyes. The alien seemed to examine it, the movement slow and deliberate. It was clear the Leviathan was fascinated by the object, just as fascinated as Jace was by it. A wave of unspoken curiosity filled the space between them. Jace held his breath as the Leviathan's tentacle moved slightly. The bottle was tilted, and to his amazement, the creature poured the contents of the beer out into space. The liquid floated in the vacuum, its glowing particles drifting slowly toward the dark void. Jace couldn't help but smile, realizing the creature's understanding of the gesture. It wasn't about drinking. It was about something deeper, something that transcended words. Then, in an unexpected moment, the creature responded in a way Jace hadn't anticipated. The massive tentacle reached out again, but this time it wasn't for the beer. It was for Jace. Jace's breath caught in his throat as the tentacle slowly, carefully extended toward the Vanguard's cockpit. He couldn't believe what was happening. The alien Leviathan, a being so powerful it could crush his ship with a single move, was reaching out, not to destroy, but to connect. He reached out cautiously, his own hand shaking. He didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, he realized one thing. The universe was vast, strange, and full of wonders. And today, he had just made the first step toward understanding one of its greatest mysteries. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the massive tentacle approach the cockpit. The tension in the air was thick, like the silence before a storm. He didn't know what the Leviathan wanted, but this close, it was almost as if the creature could sense his very thoughts. The room felt smaller with the sheer presence of the alien outside, and yet there was something peaceful about it, something that seemed to calm his nerves. The tentacle stopped just inches from the glass of the cockpit. The glowing eyes of the Leviathan were fixed on Jace now, as though it were studying him. Jace's fingers hovered above the control panel, unsure whether to engage the ship's defensive systems or try to make contact again. He didn't want to provoke the creature, but he also didn't want to miss this opportunity for understanding. After a long pause, the Leviathan's tentacle moved. Gently, almost hesitantly, it tapped the glass of the cockpit. It wasn't threatening, but it was forceful enough to make the ship shudder slightly. Jace couldn't help but feel a chill crawl down his spine. Was this a sign? Was the creature trying to tell him something? Or was it simply testing the limits of his vessel, like a curious child poking at an object it didn't fully understand? Before Jace could respond, the ship's AI cut in, its voice calm and reassuring. "Captain, scans indicate no hostile intent. The creature's actions appear to be exploratory. I recommend proceeding cautiously." Jace nodded, grateful for the AI's calm demeanor. The creature outside was so different from anything he'd encountered before. Its size alone was enough to instill fear in even the bravest of hearts, but Jace couldn't afford to let fear control him now. This was a chance to learn, to make a connection with an entirely different form of life. How could he waste that? He glanced back at the airlock. The space beer bottle was still floating out there, its contents now dispersed in the vacuum, a glowing trail of liquid shimmering against the backdrop of the stars. It seemed to be a sign that the creature had accepted the gesture, even if it hadn't responded in the way Jace expected. The tentacle moved again, but this time, it was slower, more deliberate. It reached for the cockpit, tapping at the hull as though trying to communicate a message. Jace's eyes widened as he realized the Leviathan wasn't simply reaching out, it was asking for something he couldn't fully understand. Perhaps it was seeking a bond, or maybe it was testing Jace's response to its presence. The AI spoke once more, interrupting his thoughts. Captain, the creature's actions are mimicking the movements of your hand. It appears to be attempting to mirror your gestures. Jace's eyes narrowed in curiosity. It was trying to communicate. The alien was attempting to understand him, just as he was trying to understand it. This realization made Jace feel both humble and powerful at the same time. He wasn't simply dealing with a terrifying monster from the depths of space. He was witnessing an intelligent being trying to reach across the vast expanse of the cosmos to connect with him. In that moment, Jace made a decision. He slowly reached out, extending his own hand toward the glass, mirroring the Leviathan's movements. His fingers brushed against the surface, and he could feel the vibrations of the creature's presence, as though its energy was resonating through the ship. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jace's breath became shallow, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The Leviathan's enormous form, its massive tentacle, and its piercing yellow eyes locked with his. It was as if the whole universe had come to a halt, waiting for something. A signal, a reaction, a moment of understanding. Jace's mind raced. What did it mean? Was this an offer of peace, or was he misinterpreting the creature's behavior? He didn't know, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than just a strange encounter in the void of space. He could feel the connection growing, slowly, between them. The AI interrupted his thoughts again. Captain, there is an anomaly. A secondary energy source is emanating from the Leviathan. It appears to be attempting communication through a different method. Jace's eyes widened. The Leviathan had been communicating through gestures, but now it seemed to be trying something new. He turned his gaze back to the creature outside the cockpit. Its tentacle was moving in a series of complex, rhythmic patterns. It was no longer just a simple touch or tap. It was a deliberate sequence, like a dance, a rhythm Jace couldn't understand but felt compelled to follow. He glanced at the control panel, his mind racing with questions. Could this be some form of language? Was it possible the Leviathan had its own way of communicating, something completely different from anything humanity had encountered before? Without thinking, Jace activated the ship's universal translator. The AI had already translated basic words from the Leviathan, but now he hoped it would help decipher the more complex communication. The translator sputtered to life, struggling with the unfamiliar energy signals, but then a single word appeared on the display. Bond. Jace's breath caught in his throat. The word was simple, yet it carried a profound weight. The creature wasn't just reaching out. It was asking to form a connection, a bond. It wasn't a request for dominance, nor a threat. It was an invitation. Jace's mind whirled as he processed the enormity of what had just happened. In the vastness of space, between the stars and the unknown, an alien Leviathan had offered him something incredible. A chance to connect, to understand, to become part of something greater. The room felt small again, but this time, Jace didn't feel trapped. He felt alive. He felt like he had just unlocked a door to a new world, one where the boundaries of space, culture, and language didn't matter. Only the desire to reach across the void did. Bond, Jace whispered, almost to himself. And then, the Leviathan's tentacle moved once more, but this time it wasn't for the ship's hull. It wasn't reaching for Jace's hand either. Instead, the tentacle pointed to the distant stars, to the infinite expanse of space that lay beyond them both. It was a gesture of hope, of unity. And Jace understood. The creature wasn't asking for anything in return. It was offering an opportunity, a new path forward, where both their worlds could learn from one another. Jace's fingers hovered over the controls. He had no idea what would come next, but one thing was clear. The galaxy was full of surprises, and he had just witnessed one of its most astonishing ones. Jace could still feel the weight of the Leviathan's gesture pressing on him. The stars outside the cockpit seemed to stretch, infinite and vast, as the alien's long tentacles slowly withdrew. It wasn't leaving. It was simply letting go. The connection, though unspoken, still lingered in the air like an electric charge. His mind raced, and his heart hammered in his chest as he sat in the cockpit, wondering what to do next. The word bond repeated in his mind. It wasn't just a request. It was an offer. An invitation into something far larger than himself. He could sense that the Leviathan, this immense creature, wasn't simply concerned with power or territory. No, it was seeking something far deeper, something far more profound. It wanted a connection. But what kind of bond could they form? Was this the beginning of an alliance, or was it just a moment of cosmic curiosity? Jace looked at the display of his ship's systems. The universal translator had done its job. Barely, but it was clear that communication with this alien species was possible. He wasn't sure if the creature had fully understood the complexities of human thought, but in that brief moment, he had understood the Leviathan. Its actions, its patterns, they were as clear as any words could be. The AI pinged again, its voice calm as ever, breaking Jace out of his reverie. "Captain, the Leviathan is now emitting a signal. It appears to be an invitation. There is a pattern in the energy signature, resembling a transmission code." Jace snapped to attention. An invitation. Could this be what he thought it was? A way to bridge the gap between their species. He had to find out more. He turned toward the comms panel. The alien had spoken in its own way. But this new signal, it could be their way of communicating more directly. Jace's hands moved quickly, activating the receiver and focusing the ship's systems on the transmission. The words flashed across the screen, but they were strange, foreign, more complex than anything Jace had seen before. He could only make out snippets of the message. However, the AI was quick to assist, translating what it could. "It is a call," the AI explained, "a request for humanity's help. The Leviathan is not alone. There is something more. A greater force, something beyond even their comprehension, is approaching." Jace's mind raced. A greater force. Was this an enemy? A threat? Or something else entirely? His fingers hovered over the control panel, unsure of what the next move should be. The Leviathan outside the ship was waiting, its massive form now seemingly peaceful, but he knew something more was at play. This wasn't just a casual encounter. This was something important, something that would affect more than just Earth or this alien creature. It could affect the entire galaxy. The AI continued, its voice a little more urgent. "Captain, I recommend a response. The transmission is ongoing. It appears to be an emergency distress call, but the signal is fragmented. I believe it requires a specific sequence to fully decode." Jace hesitated, his thoughts swirling. Could he really offer humanity's help? The thought of a galactic conflict, an unknown force threatening the universe, seemed too much to process. He had always seen himself as an explorer, but never a hero. Could he, one lone human, be the one to bridge the gap between Earth and these cosmic forces? Then, as if on cue, the Leviathan's tentacle reappeared, tapping gently on the hull of the ship once again, as though urging him to act. Jace took a deep breath, his pulse quickening. The weight of the moment was immense, and for the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't about being a captain or an explorer. It was about something far larger. Jace activated the comm system and sent a message back. His fingers shook as he typed the words into the system, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened in the last few hours. But now he knew what he had to do. "Humanity answers the call. We are here. Tell us what you need." The message was simple, but it carried the weight of the universe behind it. It was a declaration, an invitation to join forces with the Leviathan. It was humanity's first step into a larger world. The bond, the connection, wasn't just between Jace and the alien. It was between entire species, cultures, and galaxies. It was an invitation to work together, to unite for something greater than any one being or world. The AI processed the transmission, and Jace could hear the crackling of the alien response through the speakers. The Leviathan was replying. "The first step has been taken," the AI said, translating the alien's response. "The bond is forming. There is more to come." Jace sat back in his chair, staring out into the expanse of space. The stars seemed brighter now, more alive, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But deep down, Jace knew one thing. This was just the beginning. Whatever was coming next, he would face it with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. The connection, the bond, had been made, and now the entire galaxy would know that humanity's Deathworlders were here, and they were ready to answer the call. Jace sat at the helm of the ship, staring at the holographic display of the cosmos ahead. His heart was racing as he processed the weight of his decision. He had just committed humanity to something far bigger than any of them had ever imagined. Yet, something told him that the unknown force the Leviathan had mentioned was closing in on them faster than they realized. The transmission had ended with a strange, cryptic message from the alien. It was vague, leaving Jace with more questions than answers. But the urgency was undeniable. There was a threat approaching, and humanity was now entwined with a species that they had barely begun to understand. The AI pinged, breaking his thoughts. "Captain, an unidentified fleet is emerging from hyperspace. They are entering our sector." Jace stiffened, his fingers instinctively moving over the controls. The ship's sensors flared to life, scanning the incoming fleet. On the screen, the shapes of ships materialized, massive and imposing, like a shadow stretching across the stars. They were unlike anything Jace had ever seen. "Who are they?" Jace asked, his voice tight. "Unknown," the AI responded, "but their energy signatures are consistent with a military force. They are armed to the teeth." Jace's mind raced. Could this be the threat the Leviathan had been warning about? The unknown force that was coming for them all? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. But there was no time for fear. He had a responsibility now, to himself, to humanity, and to the Leviathan species. "We need to be ready," Jace said, his voice firm. He quickly engaged the ship's weapon systems, activating the shields and powering up the engines. If a fight was coming, they needed every advantage they could get. But just as Jace was about to engage the ship's defensive measures, a new transmission came through. The AI's voice was calm but urgent. "Captain, it's from the Leviathan fleet." Jace quickly ordered the ship's comm system to patch through. The image of the massive Leviathan filled the screen, its enormous form now visible in the background of the transmission. The alien's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable intensity. "Human," the Leviathan began, "we have detected the incoming fleet. They are not our allies. They are the enemies we warned you of." Jace felt a wave of cold wash over him. The alien had been right. The threat was real. "We are here to assist you," the Leviathan continued. "But we need your help. The battle will be fought in space. You must fight alongside us if we are to survive." Jace's mind raced. This was it. The moment had come. The fate of humanity, and the fate of countless alien species, rested on their shoulders. The alliance they had formed was now their only chance for survival. "We're with you," Jace responded, his voice resolute. "We'll fight alongside you. Let's make this battle count." The Leviathan's tentacles seemed to move in approval. "Prepare yourself, human. The battle will be fierce. But together, we are stronger." With that, the transmission ended, and the massive alien fleet began to move into position around Jace's ship. The stars outside the cockpit seemed to darken as the reality of the situation set in. The battle was about to begin. Jace glanced at his console, watching the incoming fleet grow larger and larger as it closed in. There was no turning back now. He had to trust in the Leviathan and their newfound bond. If humanity was going to survive this war, they would need to use every tool, every weapon, and every ally at their disposal. The ship's AI came online once more, its voice steady, but the urgency was clear. "Captain, the enemy fleet has locked onto our position. We have mere moments before they open fire." Jace quickly analyzed the situation, his mind working fast. The ships in front of him were massive and well-armed. The Leviathans, however, had offered their fleet to assist, and he knew they could fight back with an overwhelming force. Still, this would not be an easy battle. "We'll hold them off as long as we can," Jace said, fingers flying over the control panel, sending commands to his crew to prepare for combat. But just as the first enemy ships powered up their weapons, a new signal came through. The Leviathan fleet had moved into position, massive shapes appearing on his display. The Leviathans were ready. And then the battle began. The first blast of fire from the enemy ships shook Jace's vessel, the force of the impact sending his body slamming against the harness. His heart raced, but he quickly regained his focus. He fired back with everything his ship had, returning fire in the hope of slowing down the incoming force. On the screens, he saw the Leviathan fleet moving with precision, unleashing enormous energy blasts at the enemy. The alien ships were coordinated and relentless, striking with a speed and ferocity that made Jace's heart swell with pride. This was more than a battle. This was a stand. The AI chimed in once more, its voice quiet amidst the chaos. "Captain, the enemy fleet is retreating. We've made a significant dent in their formation." Jace's breath caught in his chest. Could it be? Had they actually done it? Had they beaten back the overwhelming enemy fleet? But even as he celebrated their success, the real danger loomed in the distance. The true test of their alliance had only just begun. The enemy was not retreating in defeat, but in preparation for something much worse. And Jace knew, as the stars outside began to glow dimmer, that the next phase of the battle was about to begin. The worst was yet to come. This chapter leads the story deeper into the conflict and shows the gravity of the situation as the alliance between humanity and the Leviathans is tested in battle. Would you like to continue from here? The battle raged on. Explosions filled the void of space, each one lighting up the dark expanse like a fleeting star. The combined forces of humanity and the Leviathans pushed forward. But the enemy fleet was not giving up without a fight. Every strike, every shot fired, carried with it the weight of survival. For both the humans and the Leviathans, this battle was more than just a war. This was a test of trust, courage, and unity. Jace sat at the helm, his eyes glued to the chaotic dance unfolding outside. The massive Leviathan ships moved with elegance, their enormous size intimidating, their weapons devastating. They fired massive energy blasts that tore through enemy ships with frightening ease, but the enemies kept coming, swarming around them like locusts. Their numbers were overwhelming. "Captain," the ship's AI said, its voice calm but tinged with concern, "we've sustained damage to the starboard engine. We're losing speed." Jace's eyes narrowed. "Can we make it to the rally point?" "I am unsure," the AI replied. "The enemy ships are closing in. We may not be able to escape in time." The realization hit him like a hammer. The reality was sinking in. They were caught in the enemy's grip, and there were no easy choices left. The Leviathans had been a formidable force, but even they were beginning to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The enemy fleet wasn't retreating anymore. They were attacking with renewed vigor. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Jace ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. The ship rocked as more blasts from the enemy struck. The hull groaned under the pressure, and sparks flew from the control panel. Jace gritted his teeth, focusing on the task at hand. He needed to stay in control. He needed to keep them alive. Outside the window, the Leviathan ships were locked in their own battle, their tentacles swiping through enemy fighters with deadly precision. Jace watched as one Leviathan ship took a direct hit, a massive explosion rippling through its hull. But the Leviathan didn't back down. It pressed forward, using its sheer size and power to push through the enemy onslaught. The sight filled Jace with a mix of awe and dread. These beings were ancient, their strength unmatched, but even they were not invincible. They were fighting alongside humanity, but it seemed like the odds were stacked against them. Just as Jace prepared to make another evasive maneuver, a booming voice came through the comm system. It was the Leviathan captain, its voice deep and resonant, vibrating through the ship's speakers. "Human," the Leviathan began, its voice filled with an unsettling calm. "We are nearing the moment of reckoning. The enemy fleet is vast, but we can turn the tide. Together." Jace's heart pounded. The Leviathans had never been ones to shy away from battle, but the gravity in the alien's voice told him that this was not a simple victory in the making. This was a last stand. "What do you propose?" Jace asked, his voice laced with urgency. "We have one final weapon," the Leviathan replied. "But we need your ship to carry it." Jace blinked. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" "The weapon that could break their lines," the Leviathan said, its voice steady. "But we will need your help to deploy it." Jace didn't hesitate. "Tell me what to do." There was a brief pause before the Leviathan spoke again. "We are sending you coordinates," it said. "Prepare to move your ship into position. We will provide cover fire. Do not delay." Jace's fingers flew over the console, inputting the coordinates as quickly as possible. The ship groaned again as another blast hit, but he didn't have time to focus on that. This was their chance. The stakes couldn't be higher. "Hold on tight," Jace muttered to himself, setting the course. "We're not backing down now." With a burst of speed, the ship shot forward, narrowly avoiding enemy fire. Jace's heart was pounding in his chest, his eyes focused on the coordinates ahead. The Leviathans were covering their advance, firing their massive weapons at the enemy ships and creating a gap in their formation. The moment of truth had arrived. As they approached the target area, Jace felt a strange vibration rippling through the hull of the ship. The weapon was being activated. He wasn't sure exactly what it was, but the sudden surge of energy that coursed through the ship made his stomach drop. Whatever it was unlike anything he had ever felt before. "Ready, Captain," the AI reported. Jace nodded, gripping the control stick tighter. The enemy fleet was closing in again, and their ships were fast. They had no time to waste. "Now," Jace shouted. With a blinding flash of light, the weapon activated. The ship shuddered as the energy beam shot forward, cutting through space like a sword through the fabric of reality. It struck the heart of the enemy fleet with devastating precision, tearing apart ships in its path. For a moment, everything was still. Then the shockwaves hit. The enemy fleet reeled from the attack, their ships breaking apart like fragile glass. The shockwave radiated outward, taking out entire sections of the fleet. The Leviathan ships roared in approval as they pressed forward, their weapons firing in unison with the energy weapon. Jace couldn't believe his eyes. They had done it. The tide was turning. The enemy fleet was being decimated before their very eyes. But even as the enemy lines began to collapse, Jace knew that this victory was not yet secure. There was still much to be done. They had fought bravely, but the real battle was far from over. "We have only one choice," Jace muttered. "We must press on." The massive shockwave from the energy weapon reverberated through the battlefield, and Jace felt it in the pit of his stomach. It was like a punch to the gut that sent ripples through space itself. The enemy fleet, caught off guard by the unexpected weapon, was in disarray. Their ships twisted and burned, large sections of their formation collapsing in on themselves. But despite the destruction, they weren't done yet. The battle was far from over. Jace's fingers gripped the control stick, his mind racing. The Leviathan ships were holding their own, but the number of enemy vessels was overwhelming. Even with the powerful weapon they had just deployed, It was only a matter of time before the enemy would regroup and come back with more force. "How much longer can we hold them off?" Jace asked, his voice grim. The Leviathan captain's voice boomed through the comm system, strong and unyielding. "We have wounded, but we will not retreat. The enemy's numbers are great, but we are not afraid." Jace's heart swelled with pride, but the weight of the situation was clear. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. The attack had caused significant damage to the enemy fleet, but it was still not enough to break them. The real question was whether they could finish what they had started. "Captain," the ship's AI interrupted, "we are approaching the final enemy ship. This is our last chance." Jace's mind raced. This was it. If they failed now, the enemy would regather and annihilate them. But if they succeeded, they would have a fighting chance to survive and perhaps even secure victory for good. "We have one shot left," Jace muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Make it count." The ship's engines roared as they powered forward, their course set directly for the last enemy flagship. It was an enormous vessel, far larger than anything they had faced so far. Its weapon systems were active, and its shields were shimmering in the dark void of space, a testament to the advanced technology that powered it. This would be their most difficult challenge yet. The Leviathan ships, seeing the move Jace was making, fell into formation with his ship. They positioned themselves in a protective stance, their massive bodies looming large around the human vessel. The alliance between the humans and the Leviathans was now more than just a partnership. It was a bond forged in fire. "Ready yourselves," the Leviathan captain called out. "We will push forward as one." Jace nodded, his eyes locked onto the enemy flagship. It was like staring down the barrel of a gun. And for a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It was just him, the ship, and the monumental task ahead. As they approached, the massive enemy ship fired first. A concentrated blast of energy slammed into the hull, shaking the entire ship. Sparks flew from the control panels, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. But Jace didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on the controls and pushed forward, using every ounce of focus he had left. "All hands, brace for impact," he shouted. "We're not backing down now." With the Leviathans at their side, they were ready. The massive alien ships let loose with their own firepower, unloading devastating energy beams that slammed into the flagship's shields, causing them to flicker. The tide was turning once again. Jace's ship dodged and weaved, avoiding enemy fire as they approached the flagship's vulnerable underbelly. He knew this was their only chance. If they couldn't breach the flagship's defenses here, they would be finished. But if they succeeded, if they could land one final strike, then they would have the victory they so desperately needed. The tension in the air was palpable. The sound of weapons firing, of shields being broken, of ships being torn apart, it all seemed to converge in one moment. It was the final push. Jace didn't hesitate. He ordered his ship to dive directly under the enemy flagship, the ship's engines screaming in overdrive. "Now," Jace barked. The Leviathans, their ships positioned at key points around the flagship, fired their most powerful weapons simultaneously. The combined firepower ripped through the flagship's shield like paper. The mighty ship's defenses faltered under the weight of the assault. At that exact moment, Jace's ship released its last weapon, an energy-laden torpedo, the weapon they had prepared for this moment. It sped through the air and struck the flagship's weak point, a series of reactor cores that powered its weapons and shields. The explosion was like nothing Jace had ever witnessed. For a split second, everything was bathed in blinding light. A massive shockwave reverberated throughout space, sending debris and fragments flying in all directions. The flagship was no more. Where once stood a menacing, indestructible warship, there was now only a cloud of burning wreckage. But the battle was not over. As the debris slowly drifted into the vacuum of space, Jace saw the enemy fleet begin to retreat. The surviving ships, their morale shattered, started to pull away, leaving the battlefield to the humans, and the Leviathans. It was done. The battle was won. The ship's alarms finally fell silent, and Jace allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He looked out through the viewing window, watching the final remnants of the enemy fleet slip into the distance. The galactic battlefield, once full of chaos and destruction, now seemed eerily quiet. The stars shone through the vast expanse of space, peaceful once more. The Leviathan captain's voice came through the comm system again, this time with a hint of pride. "You fought well, human. This victory is as much yours as it is ours." Jace couldn't help but smile. He didn't know how much of a role humanity had played in this victory, but one thing was certain. They had made their mark. Against all odds, they had stood with the Leviathans and won. They had proven that, when the time came, humanity's spirit could not be broken. "Thank you," Jace said, his voice steady, but with a quiet sense of pride. "This victory is for all of us." The Leviathan's deep voice echoed in Jace's mind. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, human, but now you have earned your place among the stars." Jace stood, looking out at the vast expanse of space, where the war had ended and peace was finally within reach. The future was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. Humanity's legacy had been forged in the fires of battle, alongside the most unlikely of allies. The journey had only just begun.